joined about 2 months ago, and I'm the sole content person there for the time being, hoping we can start building a team, in the not too distant future. In terms of my responsibilities, because I'm the sole content person at the moment, I do a lot of content creation, but I'm also responsible for social media and also for events.
Sounds very busy being the only content person.
It is.
Dani, would you like to introduce yourself?
Sure. So I'm Dani. I'm leading content at Paddle. I've only been here for about a month. I was at Turtle, heading up the content team there prior to that, which is a content software platform. So it was a lot of writing about how to do content, which was quite meta. Yeah, at the moment, we're very much in strategic planning mode for 2021. Oh, it's not 2020 next year. Do a redo. So time split with some creation, certainly, because there's 2 of us on the team at the moment, but we are growing and building out the team, just confirming headcount at the moment. So we're very excited and I'm very excited for next year and lots of new projects to kick off as we kind of build out the ecosystem.
Yeah, I'm looking forward to hearing more about how you're planning to build out your content team. Sounds like you've got lots of scope there to build that out. And Tom.
Hi, so my name's Tom. I'm the Director of Content at Duro, where I've been for 2 years, which is a lifetime in startup world. So lots of war stories. So kind of day to day, I look after the content strategy, the execution of that strategy, content production. So kind of managing all of the outputs and all of our channels. Also website, blog, social media, any third-party channels where we publish. And then because it's a startup, there's a bunch of other things that I probably look after that I wouldn't if we were a bigger company. So things like PR, brand guidelines, product copy from time to time, and kind of best practice for tone of voice across the company. So anything written, I enforce my very strongly held opinions on that. So that's like customer comms and product marketing, any of that kind of stuff.
Yeah, sounds like a big range of stuff that you're getting involved in. And Tom, what would you say is the biggest difference between your role as head of content compared to somebody who might be at the content exec level, content manager levels? Would you say is a big scope there?
Well, I have someone I have to manage. I guess that's an obvious thing, but I suppose the difference between being a contributor and a leader in that team is just decision making. So it's not just executing the strategy and doing all of the doing and writing and producing all that kind of stuff, but deciding what will be done. And I guess the other thing is, like any other kind of functional lead in a startup or a scale up, I'm judged on a number probably. So I kind of have to report versus things like revenue targets and lead targets the same way that like a head of sales or CS or whatever would probably be judged against a number they have to influence as well.
And do you still, whilst you're doing all the decision making and focusing on metrics, are you still writing and creating a lot of content yourself in this role?
Yeah, I would say that's probably about 30% of what I do now. I'm obviously trying to push that number down and delegate as much as possible to someone who's on the line or kind of freelancers and other more scalable channels. But yeah, there's always a lot of doing, particularly kind of in that kind of editor role rather than writing. And then also, I don't think I'd want to be in a situation where I never did any content creation, because the role is ultimately a creative one. If you compare it to kind of like a growth marketer role, which is more about distribution, the content role is a bit more creative, and I wouldn't really ever want to lose having some creative component to my kind of daily work.
Yeah, that makes sense, keeping a hold of some creative element of it. And have you found a similar experience, Dani, from as you've moved into head of content strategist, head of content to your previous roles?
Yeah, so I'm definitely around the kind of decision making and setting out those bigger, we talk about them as bets at Paddle, on what you're actually going to be executing, and then sort of overseeing kind of quality control was a big part at Turtle as well. Yeah, in terms of, I completely agree. I wouldn't want to not be in a position of creating some stuff and kind of being involved in that, because I think really rewarding, and kind of where you get to really use the creativity that kind of gets you into the content space to start with. So while I'm really excited about my current role, we're getting to kind of build out our processes and the team, and kind of define the programs that we want to run. I don't want to be kind of forced completely out of being involved with the kind of decisions around look and feel and on all of that kind of stuff, and checking kind of final copy and all that kind of things, because I think it's just part of now my kind of content DNA, being involved in all that kind of stuff to some degree, and having a bit of a voice on the blog and things like that.
Is it hard kind of letting go of a lot of responsibility with the content and leaving other people to create it, or is that something you feel comfortable?
Do you know what? I've always felt pretty comfortable with that, but I think that's down to the fact that I've been lucky to work with really competent people, both at Turtle and at Paddle, with Chloe, who's on the line. Hey, Chloe. So it's yeah, I think that makes all the difference, really, who you're working with.
Yeah. And moving on to Nicki, I think I'll put forward a question that Molly's just put, actually. So hi Molly. Molly's a content lead at Loyalty Line, and she's asking, recently started looking at budget for content for the first time in my role. I'm a senior exec, and I'm finding numbers very daunting. Do you have any tips for building confidence when pitching budget and resources to a head of marketing?
Yeah, that's a good question. So I guess if you're talking about asking for the budget from a head of marketing, I think for sort of understanding what things cost, obviously making sure that you sort of understand the costs for all these typical deliverables that you might be looking to produce, and also really having an understanding of what the outputs are going to be, and how those things may drive business impact, I think is really important. I think it also helps if it depends on your head of marketing, but if your marketing is maybe not as familiar with content marketing and how it can impact business results, maybe just doing a bit of research and getting together some slides on exactly what content marketing can do for a business. I think we all know here that it can be a huge driver of leads, and it really is kind of the number one thing for marketing teams to be doing, in my opinion. So just kind of getting some stats around what the business impact is going to be, and why that budget's necessary, I would say.
And when it comes to the stats that you present to the head of marketing, which ones do you tend to focus on to show the impact of content?
Oh yeah, I've got a few go-to stats. I'll have to pull them out. I'm happy to share them with this group afterwards. But there's some stuff around. Gosh, put me on the spot now. I think there's one around like people, how much of the funnel that they, how much of their buyer journey they kind of go through before they actually contact sales. And I think it's like 60%. So basically showing that there's 60% of their thought process and their buyer journey that you can only really access with content, and by doing your SEO research and understanding what they might be looking for, or picking the right channels and getting some content in front of them. So that's one that I often use, but I do have others that I'm happy to share.
Amazing. I'll pick you up on that afterwards to share over. And Dani and Tom, I guess a similar question. What stats do you tend to use to prove the value of content to the heads above?
It's a difficult one because if you're fortunate enough, I was hired really early. I was like employee 12 of a startup, which is kind of very strange to be hiring like someone relatively experienced in content. But that was a really good indicator that the people hiring me, the founders of the company in particular, kind of got content marketing, understood why it was important to invest in it. So it's not that I don't have to worry about numbers, like everything's about numbers, but I've had an easier time justifying the existence of content marketing because they were kind of brought in the first place. If I was trying to prove value on content, I mean, you can kind of, so we have a metric which is marketing influence revenue, and there isn't really any revenue that's not influenced by content, because even a deal that was sourced from outbound, for example, will be helped along using case studies and content that we've produced. So in practice, almost all revenue is marketing influenced, and all of the marketing we do is content marketing. So that kind of helps. But I think the real answer is attribution, which is like the hardest thing to do in marketing, or rather the source of the most fights between marketing, sales teams and stuff. So you need to, like, really good clean data to be able to make a good case. I think on the original question as well, on the budget point, I really feel for that person, because like it's very specific to me, but I really hate, like, oh, that's a very strong term. I've had very bad experiences with content agencies. So if you're trying to find budget for outside spend on content rather than hiring someone in-house, almost all the words we buy, like in my experience, will be worse than words we could write ourselves. So you should think creatively about, if you have a budget that you're trying to get or spend, is buying content the best way to do it? So for example, we tend to outsource things like editing and process work rather than the creative work, which I think we can do better in-house.
That's a very good point. And do you have a similar split with how you spend your content budget, Dani? Do you tend to use agencies, or do you prefer hiring in-house for content?
So prior to working at Turtle, I was agency side. Even as an agency, there are certain things that you outsource, like sub-editing, and we worked with journalists that specialized in certain topic areas so that they could go away and do interviews that were editorial in nature. Since moving in-house, I've not been using agencies, and for the same point Tom raises, that obviously I'm biased because I think the agencies that I work for are the exception, but I've had a lot of experience as well, even when you use certain freelance writers, that what you get back needs a lot of editing and a lot of work to get it in line with the quality that you need, or the angle that you're after. Even with a very thorough brief, it's quite rare that going with a freelancer, in my experience, is going to get you the results that you could get from an in-house writer or an in-house content marketer, who is much more, by virtue of being in the company, in sync with the purpose of the content that you're creating, the audience, and the way that you talk. I think even when you have a robust set of tone and voice guidelines, there's still, it's easier to have that person in-house who's owning that and running that, rather than trying to get somebody externally.
Yeah.
And on metrics, it's so very much what content is influencing the conversations and the opportunities, and ultimately the wins that are happening, and at what stage those content assets are coming into force. But it depends on what the objective is, right? So if it's brand building, then it's so some of those more superficial metrics, but engagement and traffic. But engagement is very much more so time spent reading the content or watching the video or interacting with whatever it is, versus just have they visited, tend to be the focus.
Yeah, I think that's a key point, distinguishing between, is it engagement you're looking for, or conversions, and looking at the correct metrics at different parts, for sure. Okay, moving on to a couple of questions that we had in before. Kamal Mansour is asking, how do you create content marketing that is visually appealing, not boring, and visually appealing? Nicki?
Yeah, I'll give this one a go. I think it really helps to have designers in your team for a start. So I've actually, for the first time ever, at Trulea, we've got 2 graphic designers in the marketing team, which is amazing. I've never worked in a place where they were in marketing, never always been in other teams, other departments. So that's fantastic, because it means you can really collaborate closely with people that have those sort of skills. And they might be graphic designers. Equally, you might have someone that's a specialist in info. And if you can kind of, brainstorm with them and work through content ideas with somebody that has those kind of skills, if you don't have them yourself, then that is a really good way to create visual content, whether it be an infographic or whatever you're trying to create.
Oh, that must be so handy, having designers in the marketing team.
It is, it's lovely, luxurious.
And Tom, do you use designers yourself? And if not, how do you how do you easily create content that looks nice if you don't have that resource?
Well, it's not easy, but I guess I'm extremely jealous of Nicki there. But like the obvious thing is get a great designer. But you know, if you're a one-person content team, making the case for that headcount is going to be pretty difficult, and it's not going to happen quickly. I guess there's two things I'd say. So if you're in a SaaS company, even though you might not have like a graphic designer, you surely have design capability in the company. You've got a product designer who understands visual design. So just borrow your best resource internally. And the other thing is, it's really worth investing the time early to kind of define things like brand colors and fonts and all those kind of rules against which you can design stuff. Because if you don't, like, even if you manage to produce something great, the next thing's going to be inconsistent and be a mess. And then you start to compile like a resources page or whatever, it's just going to look bad. So, I mean, the other thing we do is just like look at the companies you really admire and try and draw some inspiration from them. So companies that do design really well, there's loads like Intercom, Typeform. There's a Portuguese company called Unbabble that I really like, who do great design, and just check out kind of what they do. And it's not really rocket science, but like it's hard, and you have to try really, really hard. It was like a big learning for me joining Duro, because the founders are both design obsessives, but like in a good way. And like it's such an amount of work to get from 9 to 10 out of 10, but that last 10% is really what makes a difference. So it is kind of worth it, but it can be very painful.
Yeah, I can see it with Duro's content that you've definitely put that extra effort in with design. All the ebooks look very sleek for sure.
Yeah, thank you. And we like at the beginning, so our product designer was at Revolut, and it's just like a design genius. So when we didn't have any kind of capacity there to do things ourselves, we got him to do some stuff, not like design graphics for us, but come up with like a broad design system, color palette kind of stuff, so that we had somewhere to start. And that was really helpful.
That's very good. And Dani, you've got a question here from an anonymous attendee. She's saying, I feel there's a lot of content fatigue at the moment, especially when it comes to an overload of webinars. How do we ensure we're not just adding to the noise and really adding something valuable / interesting when it comes to digital content in 2020?
I think this comes back to what, you know, even outside of 2020 and Zoom fatigue and all of that, it's just understanding your audience and the context in which they're going to be interacting with your brand, because there are so many different formats that you can apply to get your message out there. So talking about the webinar kind of boom now, everyone has sort of started approaching them in the same way. And there's lots of different formats that you can do within webinar, and some of those will be more suitable for your target personas. So whether that's making them super short, but then making them regular, or making them like this, a kind of Q&A. Do you invite people in on to, you know, actually join the session, you know, with their cameras and things like that, and then just play with the formats within the formats, if that makes sense, based on who it is that you're targeting, and then what kind of a message you're trying to get across, what kind of atmosphere do you want to create, and also just consider whether it does need to be a webinar. Could it just be a video, or could it be an e-course, or could it be, you know, think about different ways of presenting that information that isn't going to play into the fatigue, because no one's not aware of the kind of Zoom call fatigue these days. So yeah, I hope that made sense.
Yeah, for sure. There's always ways to be imaginative with how you present content. And are there any interesting things any formats you're exploring at the moment at Paddle?
We're talking about a variety of things for next year, because part of our challenge is that we have just launched our new repositioning, which essentially is about creating a new category within our kind of area, and with that comes the need to put quite a firm flag in the soil, and place some bigger bets. So the classic being like HubSpot have done before us, and Drift, and any kind of SaaS tool that's trying to establish a category. It's things like publish a proper business book and go out and market that. hold a big summit around the topic, so that you can bring other people's voices to the conversation, and it's not just you talking about this new category, but it's a bigger movement that you're trying to build. With the kind of smaller content assets, I think experimenting with things, especially for smaller kind of bite-sized content, I think that's where you can get really creative, with like cartoons or like jokey videos, or one of my colleagues from Turtle wrote an email that was essentially a play script, and she personalized them so that your name was in the script throughout. And it's just little things like that that just shake up, especially SaaS and B2B. Yeah.
And that's a really nice attention to detail. I think, Tom, you mentioned earlier, right, a cool snippet that somebody had created of you when you were on a webinar, and they made you into a little animation figure, which I thought was a nice touch.
That was cool, yeah. I think that's Cognizant. I'll give them a shout out. I did a podcast with them, and then I was on LinkedIn one day and I saw myself in animated form with a little beard doing some chat about SEO, which was very strange, but that was cool, and I watched it, so it's pretty great. The other cool thing that I've seen recently on webinars is, I can't remember what the software is called, but our lead investors do webinars for the kind of community of those companies, and they do that thing where you're in the side chatting, you ask a question, and then you get invited into the green room, and then you're in the webinar.
Yeah.
And I wasn't quite ready for that the first time, and I couldn't hear what she was asking me, so I just kept saying yes, and then I was on the webinar. But the second time I totally understood what was happening, and that's really good, because a level above of interactivity to actually get the sidebar into the video.
Yeah, we used Mentimeter for a web series that we did over the summer, which were these 20-minute sessions weekly for 5 weeks around implementing principles of psychology into copywriting. And we kind of had, the first half was us presenting some of these principles, and the second half was quiz style or word cloud creation with everybody who was part of it. And that was really effective, because it almost created a little community within that series, because people came back week on week because they enjoyed the interaction of it, and because it was quite bite-sized. Yeah.
Oh, that's a really nice format, breaking it out over a few weeks. That's really cool. And what about you, Nicki? Have you done anything at TrueLayer or at Go Cardless in terms of interesting content formats?
I mean, I think, just trying to think of something specific. And we've obviously tried all of the ones that, you know, webinars and ebooks and all the standard ones that people talk about. Nothing to add to that, other than we've kind of tried having an illustrator illustrate a webinar. So you're on a kind of event and you have somebody drawing either live, or and then you can send it to people afterwards, or you can have them doing it and not live, but then you send it around afterwards, which is like a nice little takeaway for participants afterwards.
That's really cool. Nice detailed touch. And moving on to a few questions now. That's really good stuff about your current roles. Some stuff about how you progressed into where you are now. So I guess carrying on with you, Nicki, what specific things did you do to work your way up to the current position?
Yeah, so I'm old enough that when I started out, heads of content within brands were not really a thing. So I studied journalism after university and knew that I wanted to be in content, but I started off working in kind of business publishing, business magazines, and then I moved into agencies and did sort of contract publishing and comms, and then I moved in-house. So, and by the time I moved in-house, there just started to be in-house roles for content manager. Sorry if you could hear my baby crying in the background. He's just woken up. It will stop in a minute. Yeah, so I knew this was going to happen. I told Tom and Dani, I'm like, it's going to happen at some point during the call. Yeah, so what was I saying? I've completely been put off now.
In-house.
Yeah, so by the time I moved in-house, these kind of content manager positions had started to pop up. So I was lucky enough, I actually worked with Tom at Thomson Reuters. I was actually in sort of proposition marketing, sort of marketing comms at the time. and Tom was the first sort of content person in the team. And then we moved on to different places and each in our own sort of content roles in different companies. So I moved on, so I had Go Cardless where I was for a few years, and then TrueLayer. So I don't think my route was necessarily standard, I guess I would say, but I do think that businesses are looking for people that have a strong content background, either in journalism or video production or some sort of kind of creation background. I think certainly the businesses that I've been working for or have applied to, that has always been seen as a real positive. So not necessarily just to be a marketer, but to have actual kind of content creation experience has certainly helped me.
Mm. And what advice would you give somebody who may already be in a content manager role, so within content, and they want to go to that level up? There's certain things that they should be doing to prove themselves.
Yeah, so there's a few things I'd say to this. So I guess firstly, if you don't already, then try to get your hands on a really juicy project. So, whether that's a website relaunch, or a new newsletter, or something that you can kind of own and take leadership of and really show business impact, something that you can kind of show the before and the after. This is the impact and what I've done, because I think that's the kind of thing people are always really interested in. Interviews. So that's one. And the second thing that I think has really helped me personally is to find a company where you can really grow with the company. And Tom kind of alluded to this before, but when I joined Go Cardless, I was the first content person, and it was a company of about 150. When I left, it was sort of post 400, and we had a content team of 6, including social media. And so I hired all of those people, and we were lucky enough to have an SEO guy, not in my team, but that we could work closely with. So I was really able to see it grow, and because Go Cardless was growing so quickly, it really enabled us to grow as well. So that, I know it's not always easy to find a company that's growing that fast, but I think if you're not perhaps ready to kind of take on a 6 or 8 person content team immediately, that's a good step. Actually find a company that's just really fast growing, and then you can kind of grow with it.
Yeah, those are really good tips there. Find fast growing content. Be the initial content marketer for a growing team. And I like that thing that you said about creating a story by getting your hands on a big project and being able to say what you did before, what the results were after for the interviews. That's a really good tip there.
Yeah, and just one final thing I would say is just really get close to the commercial side of the business. Like really, if you don't already, really understand how demand generation works, how leadership works at your company, and talk to sales and understand the part that content has to play in that, because I think that is really understanding the value that content can bring is really helpful, as a content lead.
Would you advise that through, would you have conversations with the sales team that you book in, just chats? Would you get them involved in content? How do you tend to go about doing that? Yeah,
so we're at TrueLayer, we've actually got a really close alignment between marketing and sales. We have every Friday, we have a whole commercial team meeting, and we have various Slack channels where we're all in. So it's been very natural at TrueLayer, to be honest. It's been very easy to kind of, and all of the salespeople are super engaged. They all look after particular verticals. So if we're doing content for wealth management, for example, I know who to go to, and that person will always help me find customers to talk to. They will they'll check the content afterwards, and all sorts of things. So that's one way. But in terms of just understanding the business, I guess just talk to your head of sales or your head of demand generation and just get their perspective on what they think, how content can help them. And just, I guess, getting as many perspectives like that from people in commercial can be really helpful to get your head in the right place if you're going to go and interview for a more senior role.
Thanks, really good tips there. And Tom, same question to you. What things did you do to get to your current role as content director, and what tips would you give current content managers to progress?
So I guess when I wasn't actually really looking for a new job when I got this current job, but I was trying to buy a house, so I was doing an enormous amount of freelancing on the side for lots of different companies, and eventually I was finding that work a bit more interesting than my day job at the time, so it gave me a lot of exposure to cool companies. There were about 3 of them that I really, really liked, so I kind of focused on them, kind of cultivating them, hoping that they would try and hire me. And then 2 of them did, and I accepted the one that I liked the best. But I guess that's not really repeatable for everyone, but I guess the headline would be that I didn't really apply for a role with my current CV. I just made myself indispensable to a company, like with some value. And it wasn't just writing content for them, it was giving them advice on content strategy. And it's kind of that thing where if you've never shown anyone that you have a strategic understanding of decision making, they've got no reason to pay you to do it, because people have quite a reductive view of content. They think they can just go and buy words. So if all you give them are words, then they don't really have a reason to ask anything more of you. So I found that really useful. I think in terms of like, content manager looking to try and make that step up, I think like a lot of promotions, it's kind of easier to get that role either internally than going out with your content manager CV to try and get ahead of content jobs. Going to be a bit harder, or via network, or with a company that doesn't really have anything yet, and then you kind of define the role and grow into it. Because otherwise you're kind of applying for something that your CV doesn't show any evidence that you can do, and that's always like the trap you get in when you're applying for jobs. It's quite hard to show that experience. I mean, I think one thing I would say, kind of echoing on Nicki's points, is if it's the title that's important to you, like the role, then have a think about the kind of company that's going to give that role to a person like you. It's a bit like I had a friend who was advising grads on how to get your first job in the charity sector, and it's like super competitive because everyone wants to work for like Amnesty or whatever. And her advice was just like hustle, go and work for a religious charity, because like there's slightly less in demand, but you're learning all the same stuff at the same place, and then you have the skills for the next role. So if you kind of apply that thinking, if you think about the kind of company that might need someone in content so badly that they'll inflate your title based on where you are now, then as Nicki said, it's like a high growth company. Because like if you can prove the need for a function that's going to grow, then they're not really going to fight you on the title if they really need you and you can prove that you can do the job. So yeah, I think that was how I did it.
Nice. I like that thing about saying make yourself indispensable.
Yeah, I think content strategy is like, just most companies aren't thinking about it before they hire someone in content. They're not like, we need a content person and a strategy. They just think, oh shit, we need someone to write these blogs. So if you can show them that you understand strategy, then you're already like head and shoulders above other people.
Yeah, absolutely. And same question to you, Dani. What was your background before getting to your current role, and any tips for people to progress?
Yeah, so I started out in an SEO agency, and I quickly kind of discovered that I loved the content side more than the technical side. But it did give me really strong kind of Excel skills, which I have really come to value as a content strategist. And how to use certain tools like scrapers and things like that, again, really valuable for content audits. And they were just sort of, this was back in sort of around the time where content strategy was just picking up some momentum. And you had people like Christina Halverson over in the US becoming more of a personality. Her book, Content Strategy for the Web, was huge for me at the time, because just by chance during my stint at that company, they decided to go through a rebrand, and that included a complete new content strategy, or actually just having a content strategy for the agency. And though my role was initially client facing, I sort of jumped on this internal piece where I could sit down and audit our website and come up with and we conducted interviews, and it was almost just by putting my hand up and being like, that thing there we need to do, I'm happy to do it, I'm going to go do it. And at that point I'd been there for long enough for them to know that I had a grounding, and I'd studied around it and kind of had a plan for what that would look like. And that, I think, really set me on the content path. And I went from there to an agency called Raconteur, which is more known for publishing special reports in the Times and Sunday Times. But I joined their agency team where we focused on bespoke thought leadership content and content strategy for big B2B businesses. And that meant I kind of took the sort of combination of the SEO experience working with customers, the experience of building that in-house content strategy, then got really super focused on thought leadership and the power of thought leadership and how that can drive demand and build brands, and then moved formally in-house with Turtle, but because, as I mentioned earlier, Turtle is in the content space, a lot of that work was still learning about content and building out content strategies and educating other people on content strategies. So the meta-ness of it kind of was almost like I was doing a degree in content because we had to educate other people about content. And I, to Nicki's point, joined Turtle when they didn't have a content person there. And given the fact that they were, sorry about my dog, he's having fun over there. They didn't have a content person, but with content being the substance of their product, the kind of main focus of who they were talking to and what they were doing, there were so many opportunities for me to come in. I was kind of brought in as a content strategist because they needed somebody to help with creation. And again, that's that point I think you both made, Nicki and Tom, about how creation is usually that starting point. But it was so obvious how much content could influence other parts of the business. And as soon as you start pointing them out, you kind of have more opportunities to move into those more strategic positions, and especially having conversations with sales about how they can leverage content and how you can create processes that loop round and show, so you can get that input from sales into content, and more importantly, the customer insight into the content, and building from there. And it just, by joining at a nascent stage, I got to carve out a lot of the work that was happening there, and learn a lot from that, which then helped me into the position where I am now, where I can do that, but at a bigger company with more resources and more budget, and that's really exciting for me, to kind of level it up a bit. Yeah, so I don't know, bit of a roundabout, kind of specialised in agencies and then moved in-house.
I thought it was interesting how you said at the beginning, the tech knowledge that you had at the beginning has really helped, being able to use Excel and being able to do the technical elements of it, because I think that can help with a lot.
Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. Just backtracking a bit for the book that you mentioned, somebody's asking if you could repeat the name and the author of that book.
Yes, it's Christina Halverson. This one, Content Strategy for the Web. It's a little bit old now. I think even she's saying that it feels a bit dated because everything moves on so fast, and I think at the moment everyone's talking about content design, and all of that space, and kind of product content and things like that. But I still would recommend it because it just has a very clear process for what content strategy involves. And it's not that you'll necessarily pick it up and go from A to B, but you'll be able to identify gaps in what your company's doing, and start projects or suggest projects relating to kind of pulling those pieces together.
Nice, that sounds like a really good book for people to check out. And I guess carrying on from resources, are there any resources that you would all recommend to help anyone wanting to upskill within the world of content? Tom?
Okay. I think, so when I was thinking about this before the webinar, I mean, the kind of things on an ongoing basis that will help you are like, use Ahrefs and then read all of the content that they push you, because it's all great. I think generally speaking though, in terms of like improving at content in just in the abstract, if you think about content as like writing stuff or whatever, I find it really valuable to find an outlet for yourself that's very different from what you're doing now. So like I do a lot of whiskey writing because I do a lot of whiskey drinking, but stretching yourself in that direction as opposed to just writing about business software all the time will improve the other thing that you do, because you can just get very narrow-minded going down one route all the time. So if you're in like a SaaS role, try and do some travel writing or lifestyle or something, just find something different to do, because that tends to be where like creative ideas will come from. And then you're just like the level of your output is going to go up. And I think the other thing is kind of touching on what I said before, if you don't do it, just force yourself to be strategic. If you freelance for someone and they're giving you content ideas and asking you to write them, come back with like the great content, but also some recommendations about how they could tweak the strategy and make it better. Just forcing yourself to do that kind of decision making is going to improve your ability to do like a content lead job, I would say.
Awesome. And Nicki, have you any resources that you recommend people check out?
So I honestly think people are resources. You know, I think events like this, but genuinely building your network and speaking to other content managers and other heads of content, in my opinion, it is the best way to kind of help you with preparing for a more senior role. But on the more kind of functional specific resources, I agree with Tom that it's kind of getting stuck into some of the tools, you know, which you can kind of self-learn, Google Analytics and Ahrefs and SEMrush and all those kind of tools to help you with SEO and metrics is super important. In terms of other resources, the things that I really love, but they're just kind of general marketing and copywriting resources, are things like the Marketing Examples newsletter. You guys get that, Harry, from Marketing Examples? It's just got some fantastic examples of great content marketing and great copywriting in it.
I'm just going to do a plug there. We're interviewing a Q&A of Harry Dry on the 10th of December, by the way, if anyone wants to join that.
Yeah, but nothing specific to content leadership that I can think of. I think like I said, it's kind of people and learning on the job with that part of it.
Yeah. A good mixture of really getting involved in tools and making sure you're getting stuck in to learn on the job.
Can I just add one thing as well? Like, I suppose it's specific to the sector you're in, but pretty much any role in like a scale up or whatever it might be, there's almost nothing more valuable than talking to customers, and it's the same for content. So if you want to get better at like producing and strategizing good content that appeals and converts for your audience, just talk to the audience more. And you know, Christina, I'm a very big advocate of going deep, like asking them uncomfortably personal questions about their lives and what they do. But you can get so much out of half an hour with like your ideal customer, that much more than you would from reading like, you know, any number of the great kind of content resources that are out there, because you kind of get a bit blind to that, and it forces you to remember their actual customers who you're trying to win over with all of this.
Yeah, I think you're definitely good at doing those interviews, Tom, going like beyond the outside layer and really getting into their day-to-day habits and resources, their worlds. Question here that we've got, good question. Can you give an indication of the different salary expectations for content manager versus more senior positions? Rough brackets is okay.
Yeah, I mean, I would say this is a difficult one. Funnily enough, someone that I used to asked me this very question a few days ago. I'm not sure if he's listening in. I would say that it really depends on the company, and you know, this is, I guess, a diplomatic answer, but I think if you can prove your value, then especially in the startup scale-up world, you know, you can pretty much ask for what you want, and I think companies will pay if they're bought into content marketing, and if you can prove your value. I think, you know, my experience is that startups are not, you know, they're not very good at keeping to salary bands. They're quite kind of flexible, so that's a good thing, I think. But I guess for a manager role, you guys shout if you've got other experiences, but I guess you're looking at around the 30s for a content manager role. And then for a head of content, I think it probably starts at 50, and it depends how experienced you are.
Yeah, I think, like you said, it depends on the company as well. Like, I was approached the other day, annoyingly, well, not annoyingly because I'm not looking for a job, but about a job that had already closed. But it was a more junior job than the one I currently have, and paid 3 times as much because it was with a company that Salesforce has just bought. So it really kind of depends who's hiring. And I would definitely say, like, especially if it's if you can position your job as being like revenue facing, then if the company's growing and you can prove that either you are helping it to grow or you will help it to grow, then ask for what you think you're worth. It's my advice, because like the founder, for example, the founder of a seed stage business really has no idea how much to pay someone in content. So just ask for what you think you're worth.
Yeah, that's a very bold, I guess you need a lot of confidence to be able to ask for what you're worth. I know a lot of content marketers do suffer from imposter syndrome, and maybe don't believe that they're as good as they actually are, and they might not go for those bigger positions. Is this something that you've all experienced, and have you got any tips for people to overcome this? Dani, one for you.
Yeah, I'm very intimate with imposter syndrome. I think it can be really helpful to talk about to talk about imposter syndrome and talk about how you're feeling about your own career with people that you trust who are, you know, colleagues or have worked with you before. Or I think we can often get so focused on what we don't know, we forget what we do know. And it's hard to keep track of how much you've learned over the time that you've worked compared to somebody else. Or, you know, we're so focused on moving on to the next big thing and what you need to do to get there, that you don't take stock of how far you've come. But I mean, I say this and I'm, you know, constantly being like, should I ask for this thing that I want? Am I qualified? I've done all these things. It doesn't help that content marketing is such a fresh career path, that there are no, and to your same point that you two were making about salaries, like there is no rule book for content and content careers currently. So you just have to try and back yourself. And if you need help backing yourself, talk to people that know you and know objectively that you know what you're talking about, because there are people out there who are those people.
Yeah, that's a nice way to get a confidence boost. Ask others why you're so good. People that have worked with you before. And Nicki, have you found imposter syndrome to affect you over the years with your career and asking for those bigger positions?
Yeah, I mean, it's never stopped me applying for a role, I would say, but I've definitely experienced it. I even flashed through my head before joining you lovely people on this webinar today. So yeah, I think it's super common. And I think the thing that helps me is firstly realizing that pretty much everyone experiences it at some point, and just kind of, as Dani said, talking about it and realizing that, you know, everyone experiences it, acknowledging the feelings. And a tip I think I heard from someone was to kind of give yourself an alternative narrative. So rather than saying, oh my God, these people are all so much smarter than me, I don't deserve to be in this meeting or whatever, you're kind of saying, oh, I'm really looking forward to learning loads from these guys. And I've got some experience that I can bring to the table too. So, you know, you're kind of almost trying to trick your brain a little bit by telling, you know, inventing a new narrative for yourself.
Great tip. And any from you, Tom?
I think if you think like everyone who's ever got a head of job who was applying when they weren't a head of, like if you're really narrow about it, wasn't qualified, but loads of people got those jobs. So like you're no different from them. Don't worry about it. I mean, the counter narrative thing is if you're worried that you're not ready, like maybe you're not, but that might just be a confidence thing. And like people don't, like most people who aren't in content don't really understand what it is. Even when you think about the job titles, like a content manager at one company can be something completely different in another company, an editor, head of, writer, like senior content manager, all these things are quite plastic. And the thing that's going to make the difference, I find, is really confidence. And it depends how you get there, but like, as I said before, the more like work you do, the more results you produce, the more outputs you have, and the more comfortable you are switching between different types of content and writing for different audiences, you're just going to feel kind of bulletproof. Because if you know you can switch what you do between audiences and tailor what you're doing to kind of the objectives of the company, then there isn't really anything that you can't do. And you're probably going to do that with your CV for the job anyway, because everyone rewrites the CV and their cover letter to present this kind of perfect narrative where by happenstance your entire life was a series of moments leading to you joining this company. And obviously that's like a story that you're telling, but like the more work you do to make that story believable, like the more you're going to believe it yourself, I think.
Mm-hmm. And do you find now that you're managing people that the people you're managing suffer from lack of confidence, and is that part of your role, helping them believe in their own quality and their own worth?
I would say so. And I think that's true of anyone who's being edited, because it's like, rough. If you're the only person writing content, then you sign off on your own stuff. Great, like everything's perfect. The boss loved it because I'm the boss. But as soon as you're editing someone else's work, there is definitely a bit of coaching involved in getting across that. Like there's the fact something needed editing is there's nothing wrong with that. Like it would be weird if it didn't. So just getting people to be comfortable with you kind of ripping out bits of their work and putting it back, it's definitely something to be aware of. And for me, it's been kind of a focus in terms of people skills to be a bit softer about it, or like at least be a bit more aware that to the untrained eye, I could be ripping huge chunks out of something that someone spent a day working on. but I mean well.
Yeah. And have you found that as well, Nicki?
So I'm not currently managing anyone. So like I said, I just joined Chile a couple of months ago, and we're still quite small. But I was at GoCardless. Yeah, I mean, for sure, it's the same with any management role. I would say, like, that is the hardest part. To be honest, I think people management is the hardest part, and the part, especially if you're from a background of delivering and content creation. If you started off as someone that was doing the content, I think, you know, moving like to a role where you're managing people is always a hard transition to make, and it suits some people and it doesn't suit other people. I don't think I was ever completely natural at people management, if I'm honest, but I had to learn to do it, and I was lucky to be at companies that invested in training. So, you know, I got a ton of people management training at all of the companies I've been at, so that's super helpful. But yeah, it's definitely hard, and it's something that as a head of content or a manager in any situation that you need to be focusing on.
Yeah. And Dani's a question here that's come specifically for you from Molly. She's asking, do you prefer working agency side or in-house? And
I'm really glad that I've done both, and I think I did both in the right order. I think for me it was a really good experience to start off agency side, because I got to work on such a wide variety. Even though I was working within, you know, agency that specialized on certain things, I was working with very different customers in different sectors on different projects, and moving from the kind of the SEO content world to the thought leadership space as well. I feel like I learned so much of that helped me when I went in-house to kind of go in at a level where I had a ton of ideas and a ton of processes that I could carry across. But I don't think I'll ever go back agency now that I've kind of gone through that. I definitely, unless I start my own, maybe. But I do have a love for in-house, because you get so much more depth and kind of you work your way into how content can impact so many different spaces that you just don't in an agency role, because you're limited to one particular need that your customers have and pulled you in. Whereas getting to know our customers and getting to build out the tech stack and things like that, it suits me. It's a fun kind of problem solving aspect that you don't get agency side, because you don't tend to have to build that kind of infrastructure. So both, but now in-house.
yeah, nice explanation of the pros and cons of each there. I've just seen the time. We've only got a few minutes left, so maybe I'll just wrap up with final question. What can the final question be? What is your favorite thing about content marketing, and where do you see the future of this industry? Nicki, start with you.
God, I needed more time to think. No, okay. So my favorite thing is content creation, and you know, like these guys said, I think, you know, even when I had a team of 6, I was obviously doing a lot less creation, but I think Dani said this earlier, is definitely the most fulfilling thing, in my view. If you can create some really great content and other people think it's great, then that's kind of one of the nicest things you can do, especially if it's driving your business results. Yeah.
Tom?
Favorite thing, I think kind of the results of being really tight with customers and prospects, because we get a lot of extremely kind messages at Jiro that our content's very kind of useful to our target audience, and that, like, oh yeah, I've got a hard copy of your book that I printed out and I took it to my new job with me. That kind of stuff's pretty amazing, especially if it's a really small company that's growing, because there's a real sense of ownership that you built it, in terms of the brand and stuff. So I find that really satisfying. So as a future, I don't really know. I mean, the most satisfying thing is beating bigger competitor companies to #1 rankings, because it's there in black and white. I absolutely love that. So yeah, I don't know where I'll go with that, but I do find that very satisfying.
Yeah. And finally, Dani.
I think what I love about working in content is that you're constantly, whether you're executing or strategizing, you're constantly having to learn more about the people who your content is for, and the problems that your content needs to address. So I think it's like kind of like constant, like I'm going to know so much about revenue delivery. Not a topic I ever thought I would know much about, but I'm going to be a pro in that. And that comes from virtue of having to be, you know, the team that creates all of these educational resources. You know, being in content is being a teacher to whichever audience that you're trying to target. And I think it's a really nice way to always be challenged in what you do. So I think that, yeah, it's the creation stuff, but it's just also all of the learning that you have to do in order to create new content pieces and think of new ways of reaching people.
Yeah, I think learning is probably a characteristic that brings all content marketers together. Love of learning, for sure. Okay, well, I think that brings us to the end of the session today. Thank you so much to all three of our panelists. I hope that was useful to everyone tuning in. As I mentioned, anyone that's on this call, you can sign up for a 21-day ContentUK trial where you can come along to the recording and more sessions. Thank you so much, everyone.
Thank you.
Guys.
Enjoy the rest of your day. Bye.